I describe DNA as a living archive. What do I mean by that? Why does it matter? Well, DNA is alive in our bodies. It's what makes us materially who we are. And archives document history. But what about Black history? How much Black history is documented? When I studied abroad in Ghana, a lot of history that's written is through the lens of colonialism, neo-colonialism. When I came to school in the States, the history books didn't really memorialize the stories of the most ancient people of the world who hailed from the African continent. And so in our DNA are those stories. They're not necessarily straightforward to find, but if we're willing to be creative and do the work, we can take what exists in our bodies and document things that have never been documented, things that deserve to be documented. I have found connections to distant cousins where we can see on a family tree the place that we're connected. We may not have the name of that ancestor, but I found someone in Sonoy, Georgia, less than an hour away from where I live in Atlanta, Georgia. And she and I and this woman in the UK who was raised to be white and took a DNA test and found out that she was a little African too, the three of us are connected through my late maternal grandmother's DNA test. I think that's fascinating. My grandmother took a DNA test, and through that test, I was able to track down an African-American soldier who fought in Europe during World War II, his descendants, his ancestors, and how this amazing story coming from world history, American history, African history, all these things, through three people, we were able to see the history of the world because my grandmother took a DNA test. My grandmother's DNA, I only get some of it. And so people will say things like, well, DNA doesn't tell you everything. It's true, it doesn't. When I took my test, I had questions, and I get about half of my DNA from my mom and the other half from my dad, which means I then get 25% from each grandparent. But when both of my parents took a test, all the DNA I didn't get from them, that they got from their parents, I found other matches. When my grandmother took a test, there were matches she had that my parents didn't have, that I didn't have. So I realized we need to capture the DNA of the oldest generations we have, because that is how we hold on to the memories that were lost. How can you hold on to something that's gone? That we've been traumatized to the point that we don't share the stories because of colonialism, because of slavery, because of war, all this kind of trauma, whatever it is, misbehaviors, all of these things that have prevented us from having access to the truth, to knowledge. I believe that in our DNA is a door to the possibilities of all of this information and power and pain, but it all needs to be known. And through these terrible forces, these societal forces like colonialism and slavery and war, a lot of this history was essentially erased. And I believe that through our DNA, we can document it, like right here, talking, making videos, connecting, writing the history that historians didn't deem valuable to document. But every generation we don't take a DNA test as a person of African descent, we are actively erasing our history. We are actively silencing ourselves. And so I see this as activism. Taking a DNA test is activism. People will often say, well, you know, like Black people, our genome, our bodies, they've been misused. And that's true. And everything is a risk. There are a lot of tools I use daily that provide my information to corporations, and it's a trade-off that is made. And I feel the same personally about a DNA test, but everyone has to come to that decision themselves and decide whether they can wait another moment to not have access to their whole truth. And that is a very personal decision.